The impact happens snowy at night in a secluded hut. From inside we see that a glass of wine has been spilled on the floor. It turns out that the wine was actually poisoned, and our key hero in this situation, the blonde, drank it. With long hair named Yang, there is a royal peasant in front of him who is talking, in fact, because of this, that Yang is so powerful, he mixed more powerful doses, and he must die through a certain number of mines. Ian looks up, wanting to admit why this young man threw him like that. He talks actually that this is due to the fact that our key hero is very strong. He has a power that no one in the entire empire can match. When this caused a stir among people, Yang realizes that in fact, countless people have dimmed their livelihoods due to the misuse of magic. The man says that, in fact, including himself, for example, is unimaginably afraid of our key characters to a similar extent, where it brought them together him crazy. He apologizes to Jan, including calling him an old friend and saying, in fact, that he will never forgive this for himself. After that he turns around and leaves the cabin, enters the night and leaves our key characters behind. Yang remains on his knees, slowly dying from the poison, as the cockpit begins to ignite in the light of this. In his own past life, he studied a lot and came across a dagger with the mysticism of time integrated into it, in case he pierces himself with a dagger before the poison reaches his heart. He can get a second chance in life, which he prepares by simply thrusting it into the bust. Driven by rage from betrayal, he only just stretched it out. The floor around him shines blue in the form of a circle in a triangle and unusual voices chanting in an unknown language. This is his chance to return to what happened before his life, and all his mistakes flash before his eyes. The death of his mother, wounds on his body. The lady shouts out his name, and he turns around and sees his own mother. She has longish blonde hair, and his meeting with the king, and, in the end, a pack of crows against a background of the battle, picking the bodies scattered on the ground. The floor under his feet is proper, in fact, that he understands that he is in the body of his own youth, and, apparently, there are practically no wounds, in the corset. Ian, in shock, his dead mother is again in good health, and similarly it happened to him. When traveling to the past, he turns around to look at the stage around him, a snow white stall with a snow white flag. Outside the tent lined up a group of guys in order to regard their abilities. Grades are spiritual knights who decide whether they leak or not. It worked. Yang no longer dies, living his own last moments in regret, but the kid is again ready to create something else. For this one, sorcerers are considered soil, the empire of this state, and for such, in order to pass the study, all kids are required to undergo an analysis for a mana reaction when they turn 12. The first part is the mana brain, which is responsible for the manifestation of magic, and the second part is considered the heart of mana, which keeps under control and generates magic. Those who have both of these talents are admitted to Academy of Magic and subsequently completed. They are treated like nobles. Yang returned 30 years back. In fact, what is further than himself expected, in fact, that he would spend, for example, a large amount of time on the study of the dagger, which he used, and he was lucky, in fact, that he was with him during his death. The root reason why he, for example, wanted to turn back time was that a close friend named Ragnar wanted to clean his own hands. Does not intend to allow his life to end, for example, stupidly, as he again talks for himself. In fact, what won everything goes. Because of the blood they were stained with, he killed a large number of people in his own old life. He was devoted to the emperor, who was a close friend named Ragnar, but it turned out that the ruler simply took advantage of him and in the end threw it out like rubbish. Ian, in order to be different, he leaves his own mother and begins to wander on spiritual nights. He approaches one of the security guards and is seen by Ian Page from the Magrian village. The security guard smiles and finds out in our main hero the offspring of Vanessa. He allows him to enter the tent, but talks to him not to ask a very large number of questions to the sorcerer from inside the tent. In the tent we see the magician. He has long dark hair collected and dead. He talks to Jan. Lower his head a little while he walks. Use mana to stimulate your own brain. Ian is preparing what he is actually talking about, and for a moment he is slightly dizzy, but it's just that. The sorcerer smiles, has noticed a brain of mana and the heart of mana from inside Yang, and is talking, in fact, that his life intends to change for the best from this stage. Ian, apparently, is not in ecstasy from this information, probably due to the fact that he was waiting for this. He talks for himself, in fact, that it's not enough for him to simply get into the academy, which he begins to show from his ability to ignite a fiery ball in one hand and manipulating water into another, using two spells at the same time. He talks to the magician, in fact, that he simply by chance managed to arrange it once. The sorcerer does not have the opportunity to trust in this and finds out. Ian has no doubt that, in fact, no one studied. When Yang says no, the magician becomes serious and leans forward, asking Yang talks the truth. He has the opportunity to use the magic of interrogation, which is the ability to qualify whether a person is lying or not, analyzing the reaction of the body. He talks to Jan, do not lie, otherwise he will become popular as a traitor to the empire, and his family has the opportunity, among other things, to receive. The executed Ian is not shy and insists that in fact he stated, in fact that he learned how to create it without being trained by a magician. He is impressed, in fact, that his interrogation mysticism does not find lies, and he wonders who this kid is. They are interrupted by the cries of Jan's mother, and he peeks out from behind the tent to see what actually happens. Vanessa, worried by the watchman who stood outside the tent and grabbed her uniform, he talks, in fact, that she was a widow for 7 years and is not obliged to try so that at her age, the sorcerer turns out of the tent in 2 nights, demanding the aristocracy, which is why all this commotion. The security guard is frightened, telling them, in fact, that this is nothing in some unassuming kitchen. Elementary caused difficulties. This makes Ian angry. How this punk dares to call his own mother humbly. Similarly, he is about to arrange something. However, he is pulled back by a magician who talks to security that, because Ian owns the power of mana, he and his family is now equated with the nobles, and the offense of the nobles is a sin for which the scumbag has the opportunity to be executed. The guard falls to the floor, begging them to spare him and forget him alive, after which he turns to Vanessa and prepares the same. Apologizing for the text he stated and asking for forgiveness, Ian approaches the security guard and talks to him to listen. Cautiously, Jan talks, in fact, that he understands everything about the bad things that the security guard said and did in front of his mother. He threatens the security, telling him that he still has to prevent all his own scum friends in case one of them arranges something like actually that he gets their head again. Horrified by a 12-year-old kid after all this, Ian thanks the magician for supporting him back there. He talks, in fact, that it was nothing, and his job is to defend fellow magicians. In the end, he points to a person near him, whose name is Lord Aaron. For now, he will protect our main character, and Vanessa, for now, everything will work out. Baron, mustache on his lip and a snow-white cloak on his back, he talks to Jan, in fact, that he intends to bring him to the hotel, where the night order remains in real time. They have every chance of existing there, as long as Jan holds his own mother's hand, agreeing to go with Aaron in the future is coming period of his fresh life. The magician looks on as he leaves and smiles at himself. He is actually impressed that someone like that is wise and gifted, being this young. In fact, that he is so impressed that, likewise, he intends to announce this to the imperial family in that the evening sky is black and the megalopolis windless security guards from earlier are walking down the street maliciously drunk and furious from such a fact that a certain boy and an unpresentable cook manage to force him on his knees. He talks to himself, in fact, that in the near future, he will receive retribution by having fun with Vanessa, while Ian he drowned, and the man was paralyzed. Ian shoves him into the water and watches him sink in. Ian thinks about it for a while, watches for a hooded figure behind him. The hooded figure uses paralysis magic on an intoxicated watchman, and he froze in space on the bridge. A figure in a hood, Jan, who overheard that the young man had only just declared about his own mother and was dissatisfied. He removes the hood from his own head and begins to invent a situation in order to attribute the death of the security guard, saying, in fact, that he was humiliated and found solace in drinking. He got so drunk that, in fact, he accidentally stumbled into the river, and it's a person at this one. Looking into the distance, he actually realizes that he can never completely wash away the blood. Wouldn't it be nice to let him die like this? After all, the only reason he went back in time in the first place was to freeze more than anyone else from his hands, and one of the best, in fact, that he has the opportunity to arrange his elementary to defend the most expensive people to him, such as his mother. He looks at the dead corpse of the security guard floating around, and this reminds him of how the ruler left him to die in a hut in his past life. Yang nimbly returns home and begins to feel exhausted by casting this paralyzed because the spell drained his mana. He talks for himself, in fact, that he needs to grow up his small corpse as soon as possible, approaching his own sleeping mother in a past life, he received recognition as a first-class sorcerer after attending the first year at the Academy of Magic, however, including but he became a wizard, his mother could not exist in luxury, and Dai-Jan looks at his own mother, saying that, in fact, that for this one he will definitely protect her so that she can exist longer. The scene moves to the large czar's premises. This is the city of Moscow of the Green River Empire. From the inside is the ruler of the Green River, who is invited by Terry. He is blonde. With a blonde mustache and in prestigious clothes, he is talking with another magician named Herbert, and they themselves, as a friend, are discussing our key characters. Herbert explains that, in fact, mana is energy, which key hero had the opportunity to fluently use magic without studying. He has the ability to associate our main character, with whom something named first flows and circulates in the blood, and from such a stage, as someone owns the brain of Matt into the heart of mana, he will be found out. However, as a magician, in order to correctly apply this mana to apply magic, a person must be trained, but our sorcerer was someone long ago who learned how to use mana. He noticed how to show magic with self-support and became popular as the first sorcerer. Terry jokes, thinking that in fact there is not the slightest chance, in fact, that someone alive now can use magic without visiting the academy. Herbert agrees, in fact, that this is suspicious, and including it was not easy for him to believe that, in fact, what he heard he was talking, in fact, that he would prove it with his own eyes. The ruler thinks about himself for some time, taking into account, in fact, that if this is not all, then our key characters are required to own an unsafe opportunity, which he calls to the prince, who stands outside and that's all listens. The prince of the Greenish River walks. He is invited by Haydn, and he finds out his own founder, why he called him. Terry talks, in fact, since Tsarevich left the country, was spent 5 years. The castle he has to expire on the street. The dude has to touch the weed. Terry talks to his own offspring that he intends to give him 300 fighters and 3 wizards, and he has to go and arrest a boy named Ian Page. For a moment he hesitates, thinking mindlessly with his on the other hand, to believe something so weighty in one's own offspring. However, Haydn insists that, in fact, it is possible to believe him and will finish the goal. The ruler tells him that everything is in order and that he is obliged to approach and immediately begin to equip himself for the journey. To Magrian, the long Herbert, who is still standing in the room, jokes, saying, in fact, that he must go and get ready. For example, it will be difficult for him to find 3 sorcerers who really want to expire on the street. As soon as he leaves the room, his personality becomes serious. His assistant next to him finds out if he intends to return to the tower in order to find the wizards, but Herbert is talking. In fact, if not, he begins to come forward, focusing his eyes, saying, in fact, that there is somewhere where he needs to go in the first place. Scene returns to that space where our key character stopped. He looks out the window, as if waiting for someone. He understands that the imperial family is obliged to come for him quite quickly, and everything goes according to the project. Yang understands that the magician must have been impressed with his abilities and immediately announced this to his own superiors, and in fact that once today, the ruler actually found out that he would send the prince with a group of fighters, and he suspects that Herbert, in fact, will also come the fastest. Is considered the owner of the Ivory Tower, and soon an internal struggle will begin between the Imperial Castle and the Ivory Tower. Yang understands this from his own past life. He does not understand which side he intends to help, but he simply understands that for this one he does not want to be exploited. His thoughts are interrupted by the Imperial Order, which benefits much before he waited. He is greeted from the outside by the magician who held in his hands. He talks to Magic Orb, in fact, that the ruler issued an imperial decree. Yang follows in the footsteps of traditions and rises on one knee, while pressing his fist to his chest. News from the ruler is seen from the magic orb, and the sorcerer begins. Read it aloud. It tells, in fact, that the ruler heard about the great opportunities expressed by Ian Page and how he received recognition as sorcerer in this empire. His name will be recorded in the register of Ivory Towers. The ruler also invites Yang to visit him in the imperial castle, and he sends his own eldest offspring to accompany him. There, as soon as the news was ready and he began to rise to his feet, he was immediately greeted by a knight named Arnold, who reports to our key heroes that he and his friend the knight are honored to work for him and they will accompany him to the castle of the lord. While they are waiting for the prince, the lord of the Magrian land, Marcus, was waiting for their arrival. He had a bushy beard and a fur coat. He looked at own guys and talks to them to be remembering their speech, but he and his kids, he is still a sorcerer, and the ruler is interested in him. As a result of this, Marcus wants to forget not a bad emotion. he extends hands to our protagonist, welcoming him to his own castle. Yang spends a proper number of months in the castle. He becomes a hot topic, and even the maids begin to chat about him. They are impressed by the fact that someone like this young has the ability to make fireballs with his bare hands. We see Ian in the training of the earth, where he spends a huge proportion of his time. He practices his own magic, raising his hand and summoning Ring of Cold. Similarly, he has a fresh, cheerful landing. His Ring of Cold worked, and now there is a lot of ice and snow around him. However, Ian is not happy and thinks, in fact, that this is not enough if he were in a different body. Had the opportunity to mothball the whole castle, and not just a training ground. His strength is limited and he needs something to make up for the mana defect. Someone interrupts his training, out of breath, like something not like a man with a monocle and grayish hair. He asks Ian's support. In fact, that Lord Marcus left, disappeared without producing. He had not yet returned afterwards, as he went hunting for goblins yesterday, his son, and all the nights that were spent in order to understand that, in fact, it was not time for. Jan does not return yet. He tries to remember his own previous life in order to recognize where they had the opportunity to be, but he does not doubt that them to die yet. But the Lord Marcus died later when he was killed by the enemy empire. Right before the Great War, his offspring will leave the Magrian land after the death of the founder in order to avoid war, and he later beheaded for his own transgressions. Every land in this empire has its own station. Instead of this, go and ask your own wizard to help. However, the elder reports to Jan that, in fact, the sorcerer who was located here was assigned other missions, and in real time they are not on the land of magic, they are alone. Jan is occasionally shocked when the sorcerer leaves the land assigned to him Nightmare. He wonders if this is related to him, and if he changed the timeline by doing something. For example, he had the opportunity to be absent, giving information about our main character, Herbert, owner of the tower. It has the potential to be unsafe. Yang's strongest weapon at the moment is his viability aristocracy. Actually, what will happen in the future, if the short-term scale deteriorates, then he will dim this tool. Yen looks at the old. A man talks to him, in fact, which will undoubtedly help them find Lord Marcus, considering that if the Lord dies, this will lead to terrible changes in the short term. He immediately intends to quit and puts on a personal cloak. However, someone invites his name as his mother, who heard what actually happened and was worried, in fact, that it was very unsafe. Ian is still a toddler after everything Ian said. His mother, don't worry, he has the ability to be a child, but he is still a sorcerer now, and he will return before she finds out. God. Marcus's daughter still approaches our main character. She begs him to return her mother and founder, saying, in fact, that she will arrange anything for him in case he makes a splash, be it funds, territory, or servants. She will arrange it, he remarks, a certain ring on her finger and talks. In fact, that will return them, but asks to borrow her ring. For example, how he has the opportunity to test mana from he talks. In fact, that this will undoubtedly help him find them. As a result of this, the daughter agrees and hands him over to Ian, dresses a ring on a finger, and I can't trust it. It looks literally, for example, the same as what he actually saw in his own past life. It is known as a Magrian ring, a low-quality artifact that increases the mana of the one who wears it. Similarly, in fact, that god passed it on his own daughter, Jan, in fact, that he wants to return him later, such as it is important for her with ring on his finger. Yang organizes a party of knights and sets off in search of the missing lord. The Magrian ring to some extent will compensate for the defect in mana. The knights lead our main character to where they track down Marcus, where many goblin corpses lie on the ground. But the knights suspect that they were not found by the monster Yen scratching his chin. They must be ambushed by hundreds of goblins, and he needs to find them before it is too late when he begins to use his own magic to summon a wolf. What he actually cooks is blocked by a catchy light, and the night watch in amazement. Later the spell is lifted. A pretty wolf cub with a shaggy body and a wagging tail is seen in Yana's past life. A big wolf was subsequently noticed in amazement, but he assumes that he is actually not strong enough to summon a full-sized one, but points to the blood on the floor, asking. The wolf catches the aroma and follows in the footsteps behind him. The wolf cooks as they talk to him, sniffing the floor well and leading. Scene crosses to Lord Marcus, who is still alive and killing goblins. They are greenish and ugly with long, sharpened noses. Greenish-skinned and reddish-eyed Marcus and his group are surrounded and coming from all sides. If this continues, they will all be destroyed. Marcus turns to his own offspring and tells him to rush to the castle while he distracts the monsters while they are talking. The goblin begins to approach behind with a club in his hand. The son yells at the last second, but it is very late. The goblin is already high in the air and intends to deliver his weapon on the head of the Lord, who has turned his back on him. At one moment a cold trick is noticed, and all the enemies frozen in space. The greenish view is transformed into the Arctic, and everyone is wondering, in fact, that as soon as actually what happened, the ice came from Jan, who arrived at the last second to bail out the fortune, and God would have perished, and the short time scale would have been shattered. Marcus is so utterly surprised by the story when the kid bails him out that actually starts to lose comprehension. When he wakes up again, he again, as it turned out, is in the castle with his own daughter close to him. She explains that, in fact, Yang rescued everything, and the Lord and his offspring both slept for 2 days in order, the old man from the past, and is happy to see, actually, that Marcus woke up. He seems to be the butler, and he is invited by the Hogger. He explains that, in fact,